Okay, you Inkquiring minds out there, the burning question is the piston in the P140 the same as the piston in the P141? We saw there's a weight imbalance between these two, with this one being 5 grams lighter than this one, but let's take it apart and find out. To do this, you can use one of two different wrenches. This one is designed for the Majohn number 8 size nibs, and has a wrench for the piston and one for the nib assembly. This one is from Asvine, and many of you might have this Asvine wrench because they tend to provide this wrench with their piston filler fountain pens. I just widened this one out just slightly here to make it fit nicely. These Majohn wrenches are available on AliExpress for about $8 US. Okay, let's take this puppy apart. First off, let's take the nib out. Use the small side for that. You'll find there's a couple of divots right there and right there on the nib collar, and this doesn't fit, so I'll use the Asvine. So this one I know fits. There we go, it fits down in there, and you unscrew it counterclockwise, lefty-loosey. And there's a couple of silicone rings there, so this takes a bit of turning. So I got a little bit loose. I'm just going to give it a turn by holding on to the nib and feed. There we go. And there's the nib unit with the 2 O-rings. You need those in place in order to keep the section from leaking. And let's pull this nib by holding on to the shoulders with some matting material, pushing our knuckles together and pulling. And there we have the nib and the feed and the nib collar. Now let's turn it over and get at that piston. We open up the piston and use the wide side of the wrench, which does fit. There we go. And I always just hold that down on the table and turn the blind cap piston knob down until it clamps onto the wrench very lightly. And then we're going to go lefty-loosey on this one. So it's a regular thread on this, not reverse. We can turn that around. Et voila. There we go. So we just found out this is exactly the same piston that's in the P140. Exactly the same piston. And I spoke too soon. On closer inspection, this piston rod is plastic in the P141, whereas it's brass in the P140. So the weight discrepancy of 5 grams can be made up of the heaviness of the acrylic. This is turned acrylic, and this is injection molded plastic, plus the brass piston rod on the P140 should make up that differential. Well, I got the piston out and still attached to that wrench, so I don't change the length of this piston at all. I take the opportunity to add some silicone grease to those 2 silicone rings right there on the piston. Just add a little bit, little dab will do ya. Silicone grease or silicone oil, just to lubricate that piston. You can also take the opportunity to lubricate those brass threads right there, just to make the whole thing slide easily and also seal from any ink leaks out the back. Just some preventative maintenance there. And we put it back in the barrel, and then it's righty-tighty, just hand tight. Don't want to split that plastic. And then you can release the piston knob, and that lets the wrench off. Run that piston up and down a couple of times like that to spread that silicone oil around. And then we can take our nib and feed, put them back together again. This is really easy instead of having to line this up. The tail of this nib has a little part that slides right up against that little arrow right there, and you know you're absolutely perfectly aligned. Get some gripper material, hold the nib and feed top and bottom, and push it all the way into the nib unit, and then you can screw it back in the barrel. I don't recommend actually adding any silicone oil or grease here because it might interfere with the flow of ink if you get it anywhere near that feed. So put it in, give it a nice turn until it's hand tight. Et voila. back together again. And now let's weigh the pen to find out how much ink capacity it has. So that weighs 20.22 grams. Press tear. And I'm going to put my favorite black ink in this, Roshizuku Takasumi. And there we go. We have 1.53 milliliters of ink, which is what I expected.
I made this.